Thank you very much. My name is Ben Kostrzewa, and I'm a lawyer at the law firm Hogan Lovells. We're going to talk about what is the MENA-Asia tech corridor. And in talking about corridors, we're going to talk about belts and roads, and we're going to find out, I think, that that corridor is much wider and goes well beyond the Middle East. I also hope that today we'll answer an important question of mine, which is whether or not I should give up my legal career and become an esports athlete. So with that, I want to turn to Nicholas Ho, who's the Hong Kong government's commissioner of the Belt and Roads Initiative, to talk about what the Belt and Roads Initiative has meant in the Middle East and what it might mean particularly for technology investment and development.
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I think before, is it on? Before I share my thoughts, perhaps I can give you a brief overview on Belt and Road. It is the largest international cooperation platform. It is an open and inclusive platform that includes... Hello? Oh. Yeah, it sounds different. Yeah. So perhaps I can share briefly on Belt and Road Initiative. It's the largest international cooperation platform in the world, announced and created by President Xi Jinping 10 years ago, with initially 60 countries to now over 150 countries and close to 30 organizations. It is a fast-growing, open and inclusive platform with 5 connectivities in mind, where policy, infrastructure, trade, finance, and people-to-people connectivity. The main goal and the common denominator is very much about the people, to enhance people's upward mobility, common prosperity, and quality of lives. And the World Bank has estimated that it will lift, by 2030, it will lift 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty and 32 million people out of moderate poverty. In Hong Kong, we have a series of policies to support both policy connectivity, finance and trade connectivity, and enhanced technology connectivity into the MENA region. So some of the policies include trade deals, investment promotions and protection agreements, which we're currently discussing with Saudi Arabia, and we hope to be able to complete that soon, and also with other Gulf nations. And since it's in the past 10 years, it is also estimated there has been $1 trillion invested in Belt and Road projects to build these infrastructure connectivity. So now, moving ahead in the next 10 years, I think this is the extremely exciting phase, because Hong Kong can really play a big role in mobilizing international resources to start to tap into these new markets connected through policy and infrastructure, both physical and digital. And SMEs, private sector capital, tech companies can really tap into these regions and find success. And I think apart from the financial policies mentioned by our chief executive this morning, there is many more financial reforms. There is much more delegations in terms of targeted approach, and also cross-border events and promotions that we hope to work very closely with our partners in the MENA region going forward. And I think Hong Kong, we have always been international. That has always been our strength. We look forward to strengthening our role in the international market. As mentioned by His Excellency this morning, Hong Kong is truly a hub. And we want to build on that hub model to create and strengthen Hong Kong as the regional headquarter for MENA region business to tap into Asia, and vice versa, Hong Kong and Asian business using Saudi Arabia, Middle East to tap into the entire MENA region. So I'll just stop here, and I look forward to hearing other thoughts.
Thank you. I think all of us who make our home here are happy to have Hong Kong the hub of the region. Catherine, you're the grand dame of finance in Hong Kong. As far as I know, you wear many, many hats, including right now you're a founder of Misma Capital that has been investing from Hong Kong into Israel and around. Maybe you can give a little context on the historical relationship between Greater China and the Middle East, and where you see it going, particularly as it in technology and innovation.
Thanks, Ben. Very kind of you. I am a born and bred Hong Kong person. I started doing business in the Middle East starting in 2013, first with ADIA of Abu Dhabi, and then QIA of Qatar, Israel in 2016, and then of late Saudi Arabia. I would say that as a matter of backdrop, I noticed there are three striking similarities between China and the Middle East. First of all, these are cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia, China. I don't need to elaborate further. Second, they are both, China and key countries of the Middle East are beneficiary of top-down government directives that have a very long-term vision. They are not transaction-driven. They're looking at things in 10 years, 20 years, or even further. Third, relationship and trust is paramount in terms of how people touch each other, whether only in economics and finance or otherwise. And I think looking forward, I would actually project that as China has leapfrogged, in technology, in payment systems, in green energy, in electric vehicle. China is now the biggest exporter of vehicles, especially electric vehicles, in the world. I see no reason why the Middle East cannot do that in terms of leapfrogging as well in agtech, biotech, digital health, gaming. And I think the imagination, to me, is where through capital and through joint funds, right, whether it's sort of Middle East money together with Chinese money, but investing in mandates that are not just China, but the Middle East, and grooming the best technology companies, if you can imagine that sort of capital flow, it's going to be a different sort of capital flow that is US going to China, which is now being completely disrupted. So I think the power of that capital flow, whether in venture capital or private equity, is going to be so powerful. And from the audience and from people in this conference that it's already being put to action. And so I think that if you take advantage of the similarities in culture and every aspect of things, and then the capital flows, I think, what could happen between Asia, China, and the MENA region is beyond our imagination if we just put our thoughts to it.
Yeah.
And I'll elaborate further in a moment, what I think the government can do a bit more to facilitate that.
Great. And I want to hear more about people-to-people exchanges as well. But why don't we turn our attention to Duncan, who has been a long-time observer. I don't think you'll need that, but we'll keep it as a spare.
Oh, I'm okay.
You've been a long-time observer of the Chinese technology industry, written about Jack Ma and Alibaba, and then from your perch in Tokyo, continue to look at that.
Yes.
Where do you see the China tech sector these days? There's lots of mixed messages these days if you read the headlines.
Yeah, it's definitely hit a bit of a sticky patch, let's say, partly just by sheer scale. We know that big tech companies like Alibaba and Tencent and others, TikTok, etc., ByteDance, have become so large. And there's a different attitude of government towards the scale of these companies in China as there is to the US. So they're navigating that. A number of these companies are becoming quite successful internationally, as we've seen with ByteDance. We see recently with PDD and so on. So there are going to be players in the Middle East as well along this corridor. Within China, obviously, we have the downgrading of consumption because lack of confidence has sort of, not just the zero COVID policy, which is thankfully receding, but also just the attitude towards entrepreneurship and so on. It's coming back, and I was just in the GBA, which is real. I mean, we've heard about the Greater Bay Area for a long time now, but it's practically when your apps start working cross-border, and you start to realize, okay, I can do this. The connectivity, the physical connectivity is amazing. From here to Shenzhen, Guangzhou, et cetera, and all around. But now I feel the digital connectivity, and I think more than that, the mindset of people in Hong Kong, Macau, there about each other is changing very rapidly. So I really felt that coming back from the GBA. And I was just at an interesting session in Japan looking about opportunities for Japanese investment into GBA and vice versa. There's a lot happening. I mean, this area, this region of southern China is such an export powerhouse. It's such a consumption powerhouse. And so I'm very confident about the southern China dynamism getting us out of this recent difficulties. And on the tech side, I mean, there's a lot of amazing ideas and entrepreneurs in China. And I think you used the word imagination. I mean, it's hard to think back. And some of my friends here, we saw China in the early days. And thinking back is like, was that this lifetime? I mean, it's changed so much. We need that imagination to think on this Middle East corridor as well, where we're going. I mean, it's hard to remember how much it has changed, and you pinch yourself basically. And I feel the same because the physical infrastructure is going in. China did a great job. I was at Morgan Stanley here doing the telecom infrastructure at actually 3 Exchange Square when that was the cool building. And I've seen just the transformation of this city, this region from that. I think we're about to have a rerun of that. with the right focus on infrastructure. And now we get to the more interesting stuff, frankly, the software, the people, the content, which I think Yat's going to be talking about as well.
Great. I know I felt a deep sense of elation the first time my WeChat Pay worked when I went across the border, because you're always so nervous that you're not going to be able to pay for anything when you're in China with that WeChat. And great. From your position at Anoka, tell us about what you're doing in what I think is some of the most interesting spaces of esports and NFTs and everything else. And you're living having investments going in and out of Saudi Arabia. So maybe you can elaborate on what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Anoka Brands is a company that's focused on the intersection of Web3, blockchain, and gaming in a sense. Yeah. We're probably one of the biggest players in the world, sort of driving forward this idea that people who play video games can actually own their digital assets. And just to sort of enumerate this in numbers, gaming is an industry that is larger than music and movies combined. Last year was over $200 billion as an industry and is actually continuing to rise. And we ourselves actually have been beneficiaries of sort of this MENA-Asia tech corridor in the sense that actually just very recently we announced a partnership with Neom in the kingdom, both an investment and sort of as a platform to help basically grow Web3 and Web3 gaming in the kingdom. And I think there are some interesting parallels when you look at Asia. Actually, Asia is the biggest gaming market in the world by numbers and by revenue. And similarly, when it became a gaming sort of powerhouse, had a very young population actually that benefited from this, whether this was in China or the sort of Southeast Asia or Korea. And the same is actually true for the MENA region. In the kingdom, they are very active, avid gamers. They are, I think the average age under the age of 36 is like 80% of the population. So basically it's a very, very young population. One of the highest ARPU gaming in market, meaning highest sort of paying users are actually in the kingdom, for instance. And then, of course, other regions around, whether it's Turkey, UAE, Jordan, is actually also very active in terms of gaming activities. So there's a great interest in bringing the sort of gaming talent and gaming development opportunities and gaming content into the region. One of the interesting things that maybe people don't know with Mango Holdings, which is basically, I guess, a kind of, public but yet private sovereign sort of manga studio that basically is developing stuff in Japan to bring manga-based content into the kingdom, for instance. So you see content exchanges, technology exchanges. So I think it's a great opportunity for this region to basically introduce technology as well as opportunities to a region that's hungry for it and that needs it. Part of their Saudi Vision 2030 is to transform themselves into basically a digital nation.
Interesting. I want to turn back to that a little bit more, but first let's talk to Patrick from Petrie Investments, who we're going to expand our scope even wider to include Latin America. You've been working on Belt and Road projects and investments from here in Hong Kong, but also in Brazil and around Latin America and the Middle East. So maybe you can talk about how this MENA-Asia tech corridor actually wraps around the world.
Yeah, no, thank you. Happy to add some Latin flavor to our conversation here. But I think, yes, absolutely. I think that the three regions have a long history of friendship and trade, frankly speaking. I think first, if you look from a perspective of business relationships, just this year, you're going to see over $1 trillion of trading being done between MENA, Asia, and Latin America. So this is a quite significant amount. Growing ninefold if you go back to the last 2 decades. If you look at MENA region and Asia, they are now the fastest growing regions in this term of trade with Latin America, growing 14% and 12% respectively. So that shows you how the capability and how we can connect this. We've been hearing a lot about this global south, about diagonal that Guccio mentioned this morning, and I think that tells you that goes beyond the promise. This is a reality. I see Richard here in front of me. I'm already pitching for him to have one FII in São Paulo, hopefully next year, because there's a lot that can be done together. But I think beyond that, where can we connect these things? So what are the teams that we are playing? And we see the three regions being played. Of course, energy transition, right? We've been seeing a lot, been talking about it. Sometimes we forgot that Latin America has the largest renewable and cleanest production energy in the world. 59% of the matrix, it is clean, right? Digitalisation. So you have 655 million people in Latin America. Out of that, close to 455, so 75% are mobile users. If you look at Instagram, the third largest market is Brazil. If you look at TikTok, the third largest market in the world is Brazil itself. If you add Mexico, that will become the largest market, just these two countries. So where we can connect here, basically the technology is here in Asia, the execution is happening and has been happening in Latin America, so there's a lot of lessons learned that can be do it. And of course now the Middle East can get these two together and connect these things. And by the way, that's what we at Patria are doing. One example for you, for example, we manage a lot of toll roads in the region. In partnership with one of our Chinese suppliers here, we built what is perceived as the longest uninterrupted Wi-Fi network in the world, 1,300 kilometers in the interior south of São Paulo. So there's a technology involved, there's a learning involved. I see a lot, we're talking about the line this morning, right? About how many kilometers, so I'm sure we can do and work, and that's exactly how we do at Patria.
I want to get back to that. Catherine, you wanted to kind of talk about what existing trade and government barriers may still exist and how we can improve them.
Yeah, I think, the Belt and Road sort of commissioner and the FSTB and a lot in the Hong Kong government have been doing a lot of work with Middle East, but I still think that there are two aspects that could actually be done better, and I know that I've spoken to Nicholas about this before sharing with everybody. The first, I think it's that because the way we do business with the Middle East is based so much on trust and relationship, we actually need to have more people on the ground in the different countries in the Middle East. And they are all similar yet different, right? So, you need to have an office in Abu Dhabi, you need to have an office in Doha, Kuwait, or even sort of, Riyadh, right? Put people there. I think it's important because I think it really facilitates the understanding of the cultures and the people and how things could actually get to fruition. So having trade offices there is probably a good start, but not quite enough. But people who can really build trust and relationship, being a phone call away to some of the senior ministers here and the senior ministers in Hong Kong to facilitate that sort of interaction and deal making, for instance. Second is relationship building is beyond economics, right? I think the Hong Kong government needs to think about the way it crosses the barriers within the divisions within the Hong Kong government so that you can have art and culture being a part of it. There's going to be a lot of exchanges, right? Hong Kong Philharmonic should play in Riyadh and Jeddah, and they should come here in the same way. Ballet, the symphony, and in sports. So look at golf, right? I don't need to elaborate further. And Hong Kong has a great golf association. We can do a lot. So if you can do that holistically, I think the relationship between China, Hong Kong, and the region could just go so much further beyond just deals and economics.
Yeah. Nicholas, what do you think? How do we build on your good initiatives already?
No, absolutely. Definitely thank Catherine for the recommendations. In fact, the government in the latest policy address has announced that within the MENA region will open 2 new offices, and at the same time we'll put more foot on the ground in order to have built this long-term relationship. Because when we look at Belt and Road Initiative, as I told my kid when I took on this post, I said this initiative will outlive me. And it will definitely outlive most of us here because it is a long-term connectivity cooperation play. And in terms of culture side, I totally agree because the Belt and Road Initiative is very much about the people at the end. It's not about the numbers, the trade, the flights, the bridges. It's about people. So culture, science, and also education is a key formula to success when we're talking about people-to-people exchanges. That is why also in the latest policy address, all the ETOs, Economic Trade Office of the Hong Kong government, with about 14 of them internationally, we're going to expand the people-to-people exchange program. In Chinese, we call it 民心相通. So a lot of these offices will take on new roles, exactly what you mentioned, doing cultural tours, facilitating the ballet, the Philharmonic, internships or education exchanges for young people, and also cultural exchanges for performers, arts, music, everything. So that is already in works, but I totally agree, we must do more. And that is why in my capacity, I will also be traveling to the Middle East very frequently next year to not just meet people, to connect, but to strengthen these communication channels. So to show that trust building, that commitment to build long-term trust, and also commitment to reinvent ourselves in the world, to continuously to have reforms in all aspects. That level of commitment is for sure there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, what advice would you give to a young software developer or young private equity fund owner who wanted to get involved in the esports business in Saudi Arabia or e-gaming business? So what are some of the pathways that you've seen, and how would you advise them to go down the road that you have?
Sure. I mean, first of all, just to sort of riff a little bit on what they said before, if you want to bring in the youth, start doing some joint esports competitions. I mean, in fact, one of my first experiences, actually the very first experience when I visited Saudi last year, was actually to go to an esports competition. And I was there for 4 hours, and actually it's a good team. And there's a lot of sort of activity in the space, a lot of investment in that area as well. And actually, what do a lot of people in Asia love to do, and in Hong Kong in particular, esports as well, right? So the youth will probably have more connection with the games that they play together. And what's also interesting is that the games they play in Saudi or in the Middle East generally, or in Hong Kong or in the rest of Asia are generally the same games. So there's basically already a form in which you can start create that sort of interchange of culture at a very ground root level. So the first thing I would definitely advise people to do, though, is to visit the region, right? And it's very, to Catherine's earlier point about parallels to China, it's kind of the same as well. The kind of stuff that's happening there is hard to imagine until you actually see it in person. Like a project like NEOM, which is basically building like a new country almost, right? That seems kind of crazy, this new special economic zone. But then you say, wait, but the Guangdong province, the special economic zone in China, actually has done something similar. And I remember the same commentary back in the days, when we were both in Hong Kong, where it was like, it's not going to work in China, it's crazy, why they're doing all this kind of stuff, right? And then here we are, right? So from our lens, and I think for people who have experienced what happened in this region, we can totally imagine and see what's possible because we've experienced this. But if you haven't seen this before, then you're naturally skeptical. So I think the very first thing I say to people, especially younger people who have not been there, you have to visit it. It's a very welcoming place. English is fine. Just go in, and that's the first part. The second thing is that there's a lot of investment opportunities as well. So we are basically very active in investments in the region as well, and we've done to promote our particular industry. And as a growth region, because it's such a young region, when you think of MENA, you're not only just thinking about UAE and Saudi, you're actually thinking of North Africa, the whole Egyptian region. There's actually a very large market there that is, I wouldn't say exactly similar, but has parallels to Southeast Asia as a market opportunity as well. So again, drawing on these parallels can sort of demonstrate some of the market opportunities.
Great. Patrick, I'll go to you. Name 3 industries or sectors where you think there's, I'm going to use my least favorite word, synergies between Latin America, Middle East, and Asia. Yeah, no. What would you do right now if you could snap your fingers?
Absolutely. I think this energy transition, as I mentioned, is something big that we can connect these 2 regions. Digitalisation. As we just said here, I think it's something that the regions can learn with each other, with the technology from Asia, with the execution coming from Latin America, and of course the know-how and building that you have in technology in the Middle East. One thing that we end up not talking here for the next time is the agribusiness, right? So Latin America, it is today 30% of the global beef exporter, 25% of poultry, very related to the Middle East and China, will be by 2028 exporting a quarter of the world in the whole agribusiness space. So we have a whole agro-tech that we end up not having time to talk here, that is expanding productivity, technology in Asia, necessities in the Middle East, land and water in Latin America. So this ecosystem can work very well.
That's great. More involved. And Duncan, maybe you can, I wouldn't be a very good lawyer if I didn't talk about some downside risk. Can you talk about...
This is billable hours, right?
You're all on the clock. This is going to cost you a lot of money. Maybe you can talk about some downside risk in the Chinese tech sector. We live in a time of great geopolitical change as well as economic changes in China. Do you see that as being an overwhelming barrier? How do you think that'll play out in the near term?
Yeah, obviously, well, if you're looking at a government-to-government level, there's massive challenges, obviously, US, China, and the kind of who's leaning which direction, around the world. But I like to look at more at the entrepreneur level, at the consumer level. And at the consumer level, we heard, for example, about electric vehicles and so on. Like, there are trends which are unstoppable. That, for example, China's expertise in the EV sector, not just in the fact that it's electric, but these cars are just completely blow your mind away. I mean, like the latest Huawei car that I saw, you just want to like stay in it. It's got the most comfortable seat that like floats, and there's like little robots helping you with your stuff. I was just in Tokyo, also seeing BYD. They've sponsored the Roppongi Hills kind of lights, which is a big thing, and so you have to see these cars and experience them to understand that you're seeing the future. And we're seeing that happening in different business models that are coming out of China. And so the ideas alone, even if you're not talking about Chinese companies that are expanding regionally, the ideas coming from China, I've already invested in some, they can really transform. And I think some of the most exciting investments, like probably you're looking at as well, you're leveraging your experience in China, in the Middle East and beyond. It's a vision. It's that ambition, that China has. And so I think, China's challenges to some extent at the moment, which I think hopefully will be diminishing, are actually accelerating the export of some of these ideas and these companies as well. And so I think China's role is to spark the imagination for what is possible on scale, as you said. And that's what we need. We need that ambition. It will come back in China, but certainly it's inspiring many others. Of course, we've had it on the infrastructure level you mentioned, and that's very important. But as you've both said, it's also about what's happening over those roads, over that infrastructure. And I think that's where the next phase is coming.
Interesting. And what about you live in Tokyo? Do you see Japan playing a role as well?
Well, I like being in Japan because I feel a lot younger there, relatively. And what you're telling me about, the extremely young population in Saudi, I get the same in Vietnam. I'm like, oh, geez. But in Japan, I'm great. I mean, I'm helping people on the bus and things like that. So I recommend that I'm in my mid-50s now. I'm like, go to Japan, you'll never feel younger. And I was just actually taking a Japanese exam on Sunday, and along with 2,000 other people, mostly coming from South Asia, Southeast Asia. Japan is shrinking by 500,000 people a year, so it has to invest highly in robotics. I saw self-driving wheelchairs at Haneda Airport, so I'm like, well, that's coming. If you look at things like the diaper market in Japan, the biggest vendor is to adults, not to babies. So I think Japan is like nailing aging tech, but also the blue zones. I've just joined the board of Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, which is one of the famous blue zones. And there's things we can study from Japan. But Japanese companies for growth, of course, are looking to growth areas with younger demographics. And there will be a lot of talent flow back and forth, I think. And Japan is a major capital exporter as well. So I think Japan is, don't neglect it. It's coming back.
Catherine, what do you think?
I was going to say, as the only woman in the panel, when I was in Riyadh in May this year, and then in October for FII, I was stunned with the role of women in Saudi and how that's different from 10 years ago. And the direct comparison is also women in China.
Yeah.
Right? When you have a country that's growing so rapidly, it really doesn't matter what gender you belong to. They grab whoever has the capability to do the job. So whether it's female entrepreneurs who want to found companies. I was thronged in a party with everybody coming to me saying that I'm doing a fintech, I'm doing biotech, this, that, and the other. Of course, it's infancy stage, but the aspirations are there. And it reminds me of China 20 years ago when you have female entrepreneurs in every sector possible. So it's very encouraging to see that as well. And I think Duncan's Japan point reminds me because under the former prime minister, they are also promoting sort of more people in the workforce, whether you're a man and woman, it just doesn't matter. And I think those are the countries, they see the light and they will grow the fastest.
Yeah, completely agree. And to Yat's point as well, I went to Riyadh for the first time last month and with open eyes and couldn't believe the level of enthusiasm. And I think we talked about it before, how it does remind you of China in the mid-90s, where it just feels like it's bubbling into more and more opportunities. Patrick, any final thoughts? I want to make sure that...
I think, again, we've been investing in emerging economies and industries for 35 years now. And I think you ask about risks, right? I think... we need to be very careful in not confuse comparable advantage with competitive advantages. And I think this is a public and private solution that we need to be, and seeing the activities of FII, PIF, and the Middle East as a junction of that. This is where we need to be careful, and I think the work that they've been doing in exactly try to unknot this knot and making sure that we have less tariffs, We have an environment to invest, an environment to do, and I think this type of activities, this type of forums is exactly what we need to continue to do to avoid going back decades, right?
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank the panel. We've got a little time left, but we're going to bring in a very special guest. Richard Atias would like to join us for a moment to talk about it.
I'm not joining. I just want to answer to Patrick. Patrick, FII will be in Brazil next year. And
Excellent.
we just made an agreement with President Lula a few days ago in Riyadh. So the good news is that we're coming to Brazil second week of June. The bad news, it will not be in São Paulo, it will be in Rio de Janeiro.
No problem at all. You're more than welcome. We're going to host you and have a fantastic event there.
No, thank you.
If you need a moderator, I'd be more than happy
I'm
to go
sure
to
that
Rio.
we'll have a lot of moderators and friends who will come to Brazil.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Patrick. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you to the audience for your time and attention, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Obrigado.